Good evening, and thank you for joining the HBA presentation this evening on Women Opting In for Change. I'm Susan Childs, and we are going to wait just another 2 minutes to let other individuals into the lobby. I'm delighted, though, to be able to host this event with you and join you again on this very important topic. So stand by, we'll be coming back for you in just a moment. I'm grinning. I don't think we're recording yet. Hello there, all those people saying hello to me in chat. I'm grinning right back at you all. Thank you. Thank you for the compliments. All right, Lori, we're about ready to go to record. Let's go ahead and start recording.
Yep, we're recording. Ready? Begin.
Thank you and good evening. Welcome to Women Opting In for Change. I am Susan Childs, and I'm delighted to be co-hosting this event, of whom I'll introduce you to her in just a moment. But this event is being presented by the Mid-Atlantic chapter of the of the Healthcare Business Women's Association. So thank you in advance, as we do with all of our Zoom presentations and webinars of this sort. We ask you in advance to have your cameras off, and we'll talk more about that. My role as an HBA Mid-Atlantic Board Director is to have sort of two wonderful opportunities to work with our members. First is a very important role as the head of mentoring programs. My other role is the leader of an initiative that we have launched, which is called Our Solidarity Means Let's Get Uncomfortable. And in that title, we speak about being comfortable with being uncomfortable about the conversation of racial inequities and our solidarity to eradicate it. I'd like to also introduce you now my co-host for tonight, Kate Rubin.
Hi everyone, my name's Kate Rubin and I'm the Mid-Atlantic Director for HBA. Welcome, as Susan said, to Women Opting In for Change. Through raw and honest personal stories, this evening our speakers will share the impact of white supremacy and how it keeps us living in two separate realities and worlds. But first, a bit about the HBA and some housekeeping. Susan?
Thank you, Kate. So HBA, United Force for Change, and how appropriate when we think about our title today of opting in for change. We're united to do that, and we're passionate about healthcare and life science professionals. We have a shared commitment to gender parity, among other things. We foster a supportive and diverse environment and give the freedom for everyone who participates in our activities in any way, even our suppliers and our speakers, their ability to explore new skills and advance the career beyond that of which we do today. When you're a part of HBA, we connect with over 10,000 individuals across 50 chapters and affiliates, and we're located now in US, Europe, and now Canada. The company also has members that are a part of 150 plus corporate sponsors. And this year, we've had an enormous and phenomenal year of 400 plus events, topping our numbers ever. And of those events, roughly 42% of them touched on this area, this very important area of racial inequity and all of the movements that are important to what we do next. Go to the next slide. A little housekeeping. So I imagine everyone has been zoomed out, and so you know pretty much how Zoom works, but we don't want to make that full assumption, and I wanted to direct your attention to the arrows that you see moving from left to right. We thank you for keeping your line muted and your video cameras off during our time together. You will be able to see each speaker as they arrive and talk with us, converse with us, and have this important dialogue. We do want you to use the chat feature. We want you to use it vigorously and ask us questions and to give us any comments and commentary along the way. And trust me, we believe that you will have many. Kate and I will be monitoring and talking back with you and having dialogues where appropriate. And then we'll also be gathering themes from your commentary in this chat space. We ask that you can switch your camera to either gallery view where you get to see everyone's name, but you might want to have it in speaker view so you can see the speaker. And finally, this event is being recorded. So all of the content and information that will be shared in this next 90 minutes of our time together will be recorded for future use by you as a registrant to this event. Next slide, please. And so to talk about the last housekeeping, this is the decorum and setting the stage for where we want your mindset to be as you enter this very important dialogue. We talk a lot when we think about this building anti-racist advocacy. We speak it from two perspectives. One of them is from the feel, think, and act perspective. And this is commentary that connects with the work by Ibram Kendi and the work that he did on how to be an anti-racist. And in this conversation, we ask you to do 4 things tonight. Be relentlessly curious, so those questions in the chat. Listen to understand all options. Check your bias meter at the door. We all have them, but check it as you listen to the information that comes forward. And bring, hold, and always cherish an open mind. Through these things, we ask that you then prepare yourself to deal with being in the fear zone. And from the fear zone, as we overcome things we don't know, our natural instinct is to survive and protect. But as we begin to learn, moving to the next step, you begin to then move into growth. The dialogue and conversations and questions that you hear in this space sound like what you see on the slides here as you move through each of these steps to grow in the space and to become better at what you used to do in this area. As we go into the dialogue today, you'll hear our speakers talk from another perspective called think, feel, and act. And this is an appropriate next step. Once we get the understanding about being ready, willing, the think, feel, and act model will help you to be ready, willing, and able. So with that, I'd like to now turn back over to my co-host, Kate. Kate?
Next slide, please. Please join Susan and I in a very, very warm welcome to our panel speakers this evening. First, we have Aurora Archer, CEO and founder of the Bellatrix Group and Opt-in. Kelly Croce-Sorg, founder and co-host of the Opt-in, and Pamela Raitt, founder and chief strategy officer at the Bellatrix Group. Aurora, up next.
Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you, Kate and Susan, for your lovely introductions. And I'm going to hand off to Kelly first for some acknowledgement.
Good evening. As we gather tonight, Pamela, Aurora, and I gather on the traditional land of the Lenape peoples. We want to acknowledge the original sin of our country, the genocide and forced removal of its indigenous people, the colonizing of their lands, and the erasure and invisibility of indigenous people who are present today.
Thank you, Kelly. Welcome, everyone. We are beyond delighted to have you here. The events of the last 6 months have given us much to think about, to begin to examine within ourselves, our families, our workplaces. The pandemic alone provided us with so many lessons, and a fundamental lesson is that the healthcare system is not serving all of us. Today, we're going to talk about one of the core beliefs that we hold, that the creation of bold commercial excellence, which includes products and services that serve all, is intrinsically linked to the unlocking of the human potential of all within your organization. And in order to reveal that within your organization, it first begins with self-transformation, your individual transformation. So today, we are going to share our stories. We're going to unpack race. We're going to share our approach to self-transformation, and then we'll wrap up the evening with all of you in a Q&A session. But if I could, I'd love for us to take just a moment to set the intention for our time together. So if it's comfortable for you, I invite you to please close your eyes while you take the 3 deepest breaths that you've taken yet today. Let us set our intention for our time together. In community, creating sacred and brave space together. We call in all of our ancestors, our angels, our highest selves, so that we can explore the opportunity to evolve culture and its intrinsic connection to supporting and serving all, to opting in, to seeing the value of every human being, and unleashing the creation of products and services that truly reflect everyone and serve everyone, so that we can alchemize our highest knowing that all is one. So I invite you to open your eyes, and as we begin, and as Susan called out as she started us off this evening, curiosity. In the chat box, if you can take a minute and share with us what brought you to join us this evening in this conversation, as we look at it within the backdrop of all of the events of this past summer, of what we're all being called to in opting in to conversations that we may not have had as comfortably in the past. So we welcome you sharing what brought you or prompted you to join us today.
So Aurora, I don't know if you all see the chat. Can you see the chats, or would you like me to read them to you?
I'm going to be an advocate for this change, curiosity, wanting to learn, sadness and anger at the current state, health equality. I help lead patient support. I want a better perspective on design offerings. My awesomely diverse HBA mentoring group brought me here today.
Yes.
Learn how to make change happen. The unrestrained violence and open and blatant racism on the streets today. Several conversations with my sister who works in Memphis. She made me aware of things I wasn't aware of. I need to learn. Learn what implicit biases are and how to be aware of them, help to change. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for sharing. And so with that, we'll begin. As Kate mentioned, my name is Aurora Archer, and I grew up in between worlds. I spent my summers in Monterrey, Mexico with my abuelita because both of my parents were domestics and they couldn't afford summer childcare. I spent my Sundays at barbecues at my grandmother's house, making up dance skits with all of my cousins. And I spent time after school on most evenings helping my parents clean and look after the homes of wealthy white families in the suburbs of San Antonio. I'm an Afro-Latina. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the product of Hugh S. Archer, an African-American cook, and Patricia Gámez, a Mexican immigrant housekeeper. And as I shared that I grew up in between two worlds, I also matured in between two worlds. Being a mom of 2 young children, as well as the caregiver to both my parents, Patricia and Hugh, I juggled, darting between PTA meetings, sports fields, skating rings, as well as being the healthcare advocate for my parents. advocating for my Black father, who more than often was dismissed, misdiagnosed in a healthcare system that didn't see him, and a Mexican mother whose broken English made her a burden of time for physicians who simply needed to get on to the next patient. The complexity, next slide, the complexity and the richness of my experiences made me adaptable, resilient, and determined to scale the corporate American ladder. And I did. In many of the top Fortune 100 companies across 4 distinct industries, over 38 bosses, and living and working in 5 distinct continents. I excelled. And one of those places that I excelled was in the healthcare industry. I spent over 6 years of my career working and leading large brands at AstraZeneca, leading their digital innovation team at a global level, before I moved on to Everyday Health, where I worked in the media, healthcare, and publishing arena. And you know, what I observed in both of those entities was that the model for most of the leadership was actually one of leaders who were more focused on the bottom lines of profit and loss versus what I believed was a key part of why we were there, which was to serve those that we had been entrusted to be the voice for, to advocate for, to share education and information for, and how dare may I say, make healthcare simple. I also excelled at contorting myself to comply with what had been deemed the norm. And in the process of contorting myself, to be very honest, I found myself lost to myself. As I was continuously given feedback in my performance appraisals that wanted me to conform to something that, quite frankly, I was actually never going to be, because that norm that I was being continuously given feedback to conform to was a white cis male. And actually, when I tried to conform and take on those characteristics, that didn't work out for me either. I was either told I'm not doing it well enough, or quite simply, I was punished for being too short, not collaborative, and too aggressive. So quite frankly, it was a no-win situation. It took me, if we go to the next slide, it took me years of self-introspection, no shame in the game of therapy, and also the support of my friends and the love of my community to actually find myself and recognize, if we go to the next slide, that the gems that existed within me had been planted long ago and had then been imbued and developed in the experiences of traversing multiple worlds, not just as a child, but also as an adult. And they were true, they were honest, they were connected, and they were founded on the notion of mutuality. Kelly?
Hey, y'all. I'm Kelly Croce Sorg, and I'm white, and my pronouns are she and her. So I grew up an uber privileged white woman. My father was a successful entrepreneur in sports physical therapy, an NBA team owner. He had multiple entrepreneurial businesses. I ended up working in entrepreneurial businesses, was able to stay home and raise my kids. And I always thought his story to be this rags to riches story. I was so proud of it until I met Aurora. I was friends with Aurora for 10 years or so, and we got closer about 4 years ago. And 2 years ago, she gifted me the book, White Fragility. And for me, that was a major wake-up call to my own inherent racism and my white-centered conditioning. Next slide. After I read White Fragility, my world flipped upside down. Everything I thought that was not. And it was one of those Matrix moments. 1776 was a lie. Stolen land, stolen people. Everything was racist from the jump. So therefore, if everything and everyone is racist, then that means I'm racist too. So I came to terms with there's probably a high probability that my dad's rags to riches story would not have happened if he was Black. And in fact, he'd probably be in prison. I now start to see that we, Aurora and I, we were living and are living in two different worlds. And as Maya Angelou says, once you know better, you do better. So I dove deep down a rabbit hole of relearning whitewashed history, critical race theory, deep self-work, decolonizing my bookshelf, my feed, my friends even. And along the way, there's been times when I felt terrible about myself, about our country. And I hear that a lot when I talk with white women. They say, I feel bad, but I feel bad. And I really think that feeling bad was, I was grieving the loss of who I thought I was. And I was grieving the loss of the identity that I thought our country had. And I just saw that, like, Aurora actually still loved me through a lot of these ugly parts of myself. And if she could love me, then I could love myself through this process. And if people like me did atrocious horrors to people who look like Aurora, and she could still love me, then I owed it to her to love myself and do better. Next slide. And in this work, I've come to so many realizations of instances where my racism is actually baked into my operating software. For example, Aurora and I were parked out front of Uncle Bobby's, a bookshop in Philadelphia, before a meeting, and my dad called with feedback. Podcast sounds great. You say unpack too much. Let the guests talk more. Yada, 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 yada. So from my conditioning of listening to my dad verbatim, I immediately relay the feedback to Aurora. She's kind of reserved. I was kind of confused. I even asked her, why are you sad? Like, I was misreading her body language. I was misreading my own ignorance. And I always did what my dad said without question, because he knows best. And when I realized that Aurora had cultivated her own discernment in herself to look at things and say, like, oh, this is his, and this is mine, and this is yours. My eyes were being opened to a different way of thinking, a way that was potentially less harmful to her and to people who look like her. Next slide. And earlier in our relationship, I would interrupt Aurora all the time. I would interrupt everybody all the time. But in this work, I learned that interrupting Aurora was racist. So I understood there was a power dynamic and that me as a white person interrupting her was racist. But to take it another step deeper, I subsequently learned more recently that what was considered my personality was actually traits and characteristics that were encouraged and curated and conditioned for me in a white-centered world. Like, if you asked anyone, I was confident, I was impatient, and I was very decisive. But if you really look at these traits in the context of white culture, what I really was defensive, urgent, and wrought with binary thinking. And all these traits stem from a colonized cultural viewpoint that says, I'm here to take, this is mine. What can I exploit you for? And I don't care. And when I do them, I exemplify these traits, they're socially acceptable. And when she does, there's consequences. Next slide. Oh, maybe it's not the next slide yet. We'll see. And so thanks to Aurora and my friendship, I've been on a journey of self-transformation. Our friendship has been honed by really messy conversations, very uncomfortable moments. And we don't just talk about our lives, we talk about why our lives are the way they are. Aurora's friendship has changed my life. She and I were really intentional with the creation of the opt-in and how we did this work. The opt-in is a wake-up call to our whiteness. to the role we play in full transparency so we may dismantle this hierarchy of human value in ourselves and take accountability and peel back the programming to remember our deep love and dismantle the false beliefs of inequality we have in us, that when we see it, it's untenable. We cannot and will not stand for it. It won't be normal. The opt-in is here to model for white people, especially white women, the breadth and depth of uncomfortable conversations, increasing our accountability as white people, and deepening our self-introspection to ultimately show up as loving, evolved humans and transform our culture to a level of unity and acceptance we have not yet seen. And this is how the opt-in community was born. We created 3 seasons of our podcast that in my heart is a love letter to my friends and family that we can do better. P.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Pamela Raitt, and like Kelly, I am a white woman, and my pronouns are she and her. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. I stayed there for college, and then I spent all of my adult life living in cities. I lived in New York, I lived in San Francisco, I lived in Tokyo, I lived in Hong Kong, and for the last 12 years, I've lived in Philadelphia. I've spent my entire career, just like Aurora, in corporate America, working for either ad agencies or digital consultancies. And this combination of having been primarily in cities, where I was exposed to lots of different kinds of people as coworkers and as friends, and working in the, relatively speaking, diverse environments that you find in consulting and agency worlds, led me to believe that I was very culturally sensitive and aware. If you had asked me at any point in time during that trajectory, I would have absolutely told you that I was a good white person. I mean, I voted for Obama. How could I hold any racist beliefs or tendencies? But it turned out that I had many blind spots. Next slide. A good white woman was definitely, thanks, sorry. A good white woman was definitely part of how I felt about myself 11 years ago when I met Aurora. She was running a large brand team at AstraZeneca, and I was running a large creative team at Digitas Health, and we became agency and client partners. Aurora and I both came out of the tech industry, and the work that we did together in the pharmaceutical industry was infused with design thinking and user-centered design, which was pretty different in the world of pharmaceutical advertising. Both Aurora and I were the outliers within our respective organizations, often arguing with leadership or of our internal teams about decisions we wanted to make because they weren't the way pharma was done. But we stuck to our beliefs, and ultimately the work that we did was heartful, truthful, and very successful. In fact, that work added $6 billion to AstraZeneca's bottom line the year that our product launched. I was always very proud of that work and of my partnership with Aurora. I left that role and I moved on to something else. And in the ensuing years, I often talked about Aurora as having been my favorite client and the one from whom I learned the most. But fast forward to just about 3 years ago, when Aurora and I formed the Bellatrix Group, and I started to get to know Aurora in a more meaningful way. And one of the very first things that I learned was that during the time that we were working together all those years before, Aurora was bringing maybe 10, 15, 20% of herself and her lived experience to the work that we did. I thought that Aurora and I had this incredibly tight bond, and we did, but it was as tight as a bond that lives only on the surface can be. I thought that by being colorblind during the time that Aurora and I worked together, I was showing her that race didn't matter. But as I have learned, that couldn't have been farther from the truth. It really meant that I was Aurora blind, and more to the point, blind to my whiteness and to the role that even I played in Aurora's inability to bring all of herself to our work. And it made me begin to question, as successful as we were, how much better could our work have been if we had had more of Aurora, which in turn would have allowed us to have more of all of ourselves. Next slide. So how exactly were people who look like me preventing Aurora from bringing herself to work? Well, it was in part because of these white culture characteristics that I'll talk about more a little later in the presentation. But there are things like perfectionism and a sense of urgency. They're some of the things that Kelly mentioned just a few minutes ago. They're qualities that we all kind of come to accept as just being part of playing the corporate game. When I started to learn about these white culture characteristics, I saw myself. I saw my colleagues. I saw my bosses. I saw my performance reviews. And I saw how much I bought into these values as being important and as being intrinsic to everything I wanted to achieve. And at the same time, I was judging others who reported to me against those same standards. When I connected this all back to race and to Aurora not showing up fully herself, I realized that these elements of white culture force us to turn ourselves into a different version of who we are, which inevitably means we're leaving part of ourselves behind. And we're never truly connecting with anyone else as who they really are or as who we really are. And it also helped me begin to see the role that I was playing as a good white person in creating a culture that was toxic. Next slide. So part of who Aurora and I both are is mothers of teenage sons. I think about them both as sweet, innocent kids, and yet their experience as teenage boys and Aurora's and my experience as mothers is not the same. Aurora has to talk to her son Liam about his behavior and about what to do if he gets pulled over when driving. And she has to prepare him to think about things that aren't innocent, that no child should have to think about. While my son Hudson and I don't have to have any of those conversations. And so Liam has become a heart center of my journey, as my deepest desire is for him to have the same treatment and opportunity as my son, and equally for my son to benefit from truly knowing someone like Liam by dismantling his own white privilege. And so my journey in this work is newer than Kelly's. It's a journey that I have at times resisted, questioned, been annoyed by, and also absolutely loved. But the one thing I haven't done since I really truly committed myself to being on this journey is stopped moving forward. Because I know and believe that for me to be the best possible version of myself, to model for my son and my community, and to create a better world, I have to continue to do this work of dismantling white supremacy in myself. So now that you've heard our stories, we'd love to ask you once again to interact with us in the chat box and maybe identify areas where your role or work environment could evolve to support and serve the broader BIPOC community.
We all need to be gifted white fragility. No, you have to buy it yourself, and you have to buy copies for your friends too. As a people leader, being a better example for my team and an ally to those on my team. I love the points about dismantling the corporate narrative we all bought into implicitly. Yes, Erin, we're going to talk a lot more about that. Thank you.
So next slide. Thank you all. For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Next slide. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. Audre Lorde. So what do all these stories have in common? All of these journeys, intersecting journeys. Race. Surprise, surprise. And whiteness, actually, to be exact. Our attachment to race is what keeps us unconscious. It keeps us separated. And it keeps us from being our most truest and authentic self in our personal lives as well as in our work lives. So what is race? If we go to the next slide. First and foremost, it's really important to understand that it's a made-up construct. And that it has been established as the norm. Whiteness sits at the epicenter by which everything is measured. Whiteness establishes the hierarchy by which all is valued or not, and it establishes the value of humans. Blackness was created in direct opposition to whiteness, and your value is determined by your proximity to whiteness. It's what we tend to refer to as privilege. Whiteness and white supremacy sit at the foundation of our history, and it is embedded in every single aspect of our existence. The system of whiteness exists and is upheld in every part of our lives. The system of our healthcare system that was no more made obvious than through the pandemic. It exists in our academic settings, in our legal model, housing, government, policies, you name it. Look where you look and you will find it everywhere. And we are all consciously or unconsciously upholding it.
Next slide. So if you're like me, next slide. I hadn't noticed that there was a set of norms by which we all operate on in whiteness. You can see them all here. And when I tell you I could check every box, I could check every box, except the bland food only one. But seeing them, I look back at myself with shock. This was the blueprint I aspired my life to be. This was the standard operating procedure. Anything else was less than ideal. I can now see how highly problematic that is. If I'm not following the script, I'm not normal, I'm deviant. This blueprint is valued as ideal, and then all the systems are built around it. And so if this is true for race, then it's true for sexuality, for gender, for ability, for religion. It promotes othering and measurement and hierarchy. And these norms harm me and others because I was judging myself based on them, and I was judging Pamela based on them, and I was judging Aurora based on them, and I was judging everyone that looked like Aurora based on them too. So take a sec, look at the list, and please enter into the chat. When you look at this list, which of these cultural norms do you identify with, either in yourself or in those you work and interact with? I have a lot. I mean, right? I even have 2.3 children. Not really. I mean, he's a full child. But. I know some of you have come across some of these. I mean, European beauty. Hello. Okay, so the question is, when you look at this list of cultural norms, what do you identify with, either in yourself or in those you work and interact with? Rugged individualism, totally. Mm-hmm. Protestant work ethic. You get what you deserve. Oh my gosh, how many times I can hear my parents saying it actually. European standard of beauty, absolutely. Respect authority. Mm-hmm. Scientific method, yes. Intersectionality, yes. Scientific method, would like to explore more. Holidays, history, time, Protestant work ethic, wealth equals worth.
Yes.
So many, I'm embarrassed to say. I'm with you, Michelle. Heavy value on ownership of goods. Oh my gosh, totally. I think my parents cared about their white carpet in their bedroom more than us sometimes growing up. Status, power, authority. I absolutely see that. Aesthetic norms are shifting a bit. Yes, it's good to see. Next slide.
So, in addition to the norms that Kelly just talked about, white culture is also built around the perpetuating of certain characteristics, as I mentioned earlier. Next slide. These characteristics, and this is only a handful of them, so you'll see more in just a second, but I dare say they look like the model of all that is wrong in practically every organization I have ever worked with or for in corporate America. Not that we would use any of these words to describe our culture. We would say we work hard. We would say we are results driven. We would say we value grit and self-actualization. But these characteristics center a set of behaviors and norms that exclude all of those who can't or don't conform to them. And I've seen them play out over and over again in many different ways. I've seen it in the defensiveness that comes up a lot when you work in innovation and someone on the team is resistant to change because they perceive that the change will threaten them in some way. I lived it in the constant fire drills, where such a huge part of agency and consultancy life was everything needing to be done by EOD or COB, and oftentimes I was the one demanding that. Next slide. I myself have fallen into the trap of binary thinking, either or thinking, often when I'm trying to simplify a complex problem. And I find that distilling the possible solutions down to only two will be quicker than exploring all the possible storylines and solutions in between the ends of the spectrum. And I've certainly lived it in paternalism, where only a few people with power, typically white men, are making decisions on behalf of everyone else. These characteristics absolutely prevent us from doing our best work and being our full selves, but they also cause harm, as I said earlier, to anyone who can't conform to these characteristics and to those who are judged against them as if they are the norm. Next slide.
So we've laid out a lot of whiteness. Looking at these norms and cultural characteristics, I have to ask myself, what did I unconsciously agree to? What contract did I sign? And why don't we talk about it? Why does it feel so gross? Why do I deny it? Why do uncomfortable feelings stir in my body around it? Because once these invisible agreements and these false beliefs become conscious, then I'm able to look at them and deconstruct them within myself. What I've been unconscious to has been silently governing me. Next slide. Dismantling whiteness and the centering of whiteness is an inside job. And everyone comes to this journey differently, and that's okay. The self-work is vital, though, because otherwise I'll think it's outside of me. I'll think it's somebody else's problem, somebody else's fault. There's huge systemic problems that I can't fix, but really it starts with me. And then it ripples out to my family, to my vocation, and to my society.
Next slide. Okay. So now, what do you do with all of this awareness and this self-introspection? Well, what I've done is start to question myself. I've started to slow down and listen. I've started to wonder in the times where thinking about race or talking about race makes me uncomfortable. Why does it make me so uncomfortable? What is there for me to learn and grow into? What am I afraid of? It's caused me to look at many aspects of my life and my history with a different lens. I have replayed conversations with Aurora. I have revisited things I said in meetings 10 years ago. I have thought about so many aspects of what I have always believed to be true and tested them against the things that I am learning now. I've been purposely exposing myself to new ideas, books, movies, websites, you name it, in an effort to educate myself, even when it feels unfamiliar, or I'll use Kelly's word, gross. I also had to make a commitment with myself that this can't be something temporary, but that it's a journey I have committed to within myself, and for the world. And anything that big is going to take a lot of time and effort. In fact, it's going to take the rest of my life. And it's going to require a lot of excavating and unpeeling and transforming from the me that was before to the me that can't ever go back to being that version of Pamela.
So next slide. Oh no, I think it's the slide still. I was born thinking that inequality was normal. Just stay with me for a second. So my dad was the boss and my mom supported him wholeheartedly. It was unequal. And this was how we even forged emotional connection with each other.
You want a sandwich, turkey and cheese?
Yes, that sounds good. it was flawed and it was pervasive. It's pervasive. So I maybe like 3 years ago would have said, oh my gosh, I just came to the realization that inequity and inequality is like throughout everything in our country. But what I realize is that I was okay with inequality. It was normal for me. And now that I see that, it's not okay.
Charlie, you want some of them, you want some of these things?
Do we want to, Janelle? Okay, cool. Thanks, Janelle. And though it's not easy, you know, I had to do a lot of deep work, and there was classes involved and recovery groups and communities of practice. But now it's like, I feel free. I even talk about this with my parents. I've met amazing people on my journey. I've cried and I've laughed and loved harder than I have in my entire life thus far. And I realized that my narcissistic programming kept me from really, truly feeling and truly living. And my old way of being no longer serves me. So I have had to personally transform, and we all do. This accountability of change has been laid on our doorstep as white people.
Next slide. So today, we are here gathering in community to sit with accountability, to look at what is the work. And if there is something that Kelly, Pamela, and I know for sure, based on our journeys, our friendship, and our business partnership, and our own work, is that any change starts first with personal transformation. It's messy, it doesn't look pretty, but it's heart-centered, and yes, it's uncomfortable. And it's also the pathway to true humanity. So today, we're going to share our personal transformation framework. The 5 elements of transformation include defining your motivation, envisioning hope and belief, making sure we're solving for the right problem, because as we see it, we often spend a lot of time focusing on the symptoms. It's going to take work, and we have space dedicated to transform. And that means is that we have to define habits and structures that we cultivate and we make a part of our daily routine. This work is hard, and as we said, it's uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, it's critical because it pushes us. It pushes us into that uncomfortable zone. And this is where, quite frankly, the last element of our framework comes to play, which is community. And the reality that none of us can do this alone. I can't do it alone. Kelly and Pamela can't do it alone. And we don't believe that you can do it alone.
Next slide. So with any transformation, it starts with motivation. And there's 2 main reasons for motivation. It's personal and it's pain. So it's personal because it's an inside job. I have to want it for myself. I can't just want it for Aurora or her children, because motivation comes from an even deeper place than that. My own personal motivation is key. And then I'm less likely to become indifferent. And indifference is the death of transformation. And then pain. One of our greatest sources of motivation is painful feelings. The problem is that instead of learning to sit with discomfort, I was taught to get rid of it, and fast. I pushed it away, numbed it, blamed it on others. I consumed it, distracted myself. I even took action, anything but actually feeling my feelings. And the good news is that motivation grows and it sustains you. So you have to want it, you have to feel your pain, and motivation will grow. And if you don't know what your motivation is, this is a good place to start. So we invite everyone tonight to name your motivation. Take a moment, close your eyes, feel, take a breath. What is your motivation for opting in and making change? and then type it into the chat box. You guys have been awful. You all, don't say guys anymore, but I just did. You all have been so honest and forthright in the chat box already. Don't be scared. Need for fairness for my nieces. I love that. For my girls to help heal the world. Good role model for my kids. For my kids. Better world for my daughter, for my friends, for my family, for my kids. I'm a religious Hindu. Self-improvement and deprogramming is a huge part of my faith to ensure my kids know they're valued. I want to bring every white person to know a few steps further forward on this journey.
Acceptance.
For my family, acceptance, because it's the right thing to do. Thank you. To help heal hurts.
Thank you so much. So if we click, one of the other critical aspects in this self-transformation work, and I'm sorry, if we move to the next slide. You know, we've all been there. We've all been there where we've got this, you know, significant objective that we have to achieve, or in my case, you know, a huge transformational, intergalactic, global effort. And we want change, but we don't necessarily know or think it can happen. It's too big, it's too daunting, and motivation isn't enough. I mean, we can look at our world right now and there's so much craziness happening that we can just say, okay, this isn't possible. But we have to believe. We have to believe that there is a better way. I have to have faith in something bigger than myself, and I have to have a belief that it's possible. And to be very honest, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have started the Opt-in podcast. We wouldn't be doing the opt-in culture work that we do with organizations if I didn't believe and have hope in your ability to transform.
Next slide. So as Kelly mentioned, we need motivation in order to be on a journey like this, but we also have to be solving for the right problem in order to be effective in transformation. And one of the things that we know based on the work that we've done with all kinds of organizations, including some pretty big health organizations, is that in corporate America, the focus is not yet on the right problem for the most part. The focus is on things like unconscious bias, the hiring pipeline, employee reviews. Some organizations are getting closer by trying to solve for things like diversity, inclusion, inequity, and implicit bias. But all of these pervasive and important issues are really just symptoms and often distractions from the root problem. So what is the root problem?
I'm going to tell you, it's white supremacy. It's white supremacy cultural conditioning. The root cause is white supremacy cultural conditioning. White is centered, white is desirable, white is better, white is supreme, and everything else is deviant or other or less than. Next slide. I thought this quote was in there on a slide. My bad. I'm going to give you a little quote. White supremacy is an illness. I don't wish it on anyone, not on myself, not on you. We've all been told a lie. And our work, particularly for those of us who say we identify with this path of liberation, is to free ourselves of that lie, to get in there and observe the construct and the ways in which it limits us from our full potential. And that's the Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams. So you'll hear people say, you got to do the work. You got to do the work. Do the work. What does the work mean? We believe this is the work. Understanding that white supremacy is within each and every one of us and that our programming is deep. Constantly improve our white racial literacy. We have got to catch up to learning the real history, understanding the true building blocks of this country to see exactly how we got here and to continue replicating it. We have to build stamina to stay in it for the long haul. I know you know what stamina is. We don't like work out for 2 months and then say, we're fit. Okay, we're done for life. I mean, it's like anything. We train for it. We practice, we rest, we get stronger, we bounce back faster. All three of these things are responsible to practice simultaneously: self-work, racial literacy, and building stamina, which can be supported by habits and structures. Habits and structures are the daily things we do to support our motivation and our hope in solving for the right problem. Structures support our habits. So if my habit is exercise, my structure is a gym. So my habit could be reading a book by a Black author every day, and the structure could be a book club. My habit could be examining my white supremacy that's internalized, and the structure could be Layla Saad's workbook, Me and White Supremacy. There are so many habits and structures out there, and you may not even know of a lot of them yet, but you may see now in the chat when we ask you, what are the 1 to 2 habits and structures you're going to commit to and lean on daily? You'll get ideas from your community. Because the key to habits and structures is every day, no matter what. So take a breath. What are the 1 to 2 habits and structures you're going to commit to and lean on daily? Erin, thank you. Listening to the Opt-in podcast. Ding, ding, ding. No, but really, I mean, the podcast, people are like, what did you do? I'm like, just listen to the podcast. It basically walks us through all the people I talked to and try to figure it out. I have a habit to learning, so now I need to be intentional about learning the true history and how to be a better ally each day. Read more about racism, implicit bias, talk about it more with my colleagues.
Yes.
Don't know I can do it daily, but I would like to reach out to others and learn their story and background. I guess there's tons of podcasts. Yeah, we have resources on our website too for everyone in case you are looking for habits and structures. We have tons of resources. Leading a book club, which requires daily thought and effort to create,
Yes.
and working more with leaders at work to increase awareness of problem areas and possible solutions. Thank you. So we just walked you through, we'll do next slide. We just walked you through a framework for transformational change, and you can personalize it to fit where you are in your journey. All the elements exist in mutuality to support each other. So if your motivation is running low, you may be amped up on hope. You may know the problem you're solving for, but you may need to up your habits and structures. They all kind of fulfill each other. And what's the one foundational element that's going to pull you through the whole process? It is a community. And some of us are super lucky because we may come from a culture where community is the bedrock of survival and of joy. And others, like me, have been taught to be ruggedly individual or pay for a country club membership. And are realizing that that nonsense is counter to our humanness. So together, we have created the opt-in community. We share ideas, encourage each other, we ask questions of each other, leverage content we've already created in the podcast. And we help each other be accountable to this transformation. Because as Aurora says, nothing changes if nothing changes. And that's where community comes in. It's the glue and it's the goal. You may even have more than one community, a couple of close friends, an accountability buddy, a few colleagues, a pod at work. Community is so important because it keeps us accountable when we lose our way. Pamela and I can't do this alone. I don't want to. A sound transformational process makes us all well.
Next slide. And we do this, we commit to this because your humanity depends on it. Our humanity depends on it. Doing this work offers us the opportunity to be human, to connect to the center of ourselves, which bridges the connection to others, and seeing our own humanity allows us to see the humanity in others.
Next slide. Here's Reverend Angel again. Love and justice are not two. Without inner change, there can be no outer change. And without collective change, no change matters. Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams. So now we are at the final segment of our time together. It's often our favorite part, and that's the question and answer section. So I believe, Susan, help us out of how you
Yes.
want to do the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you. So first, thank you. So moving, so impeccable. There's a round of applause somewhere going on, I am certain, in our virtual universe. This was a very poignant journey, and I was prepared for it, and I'm still, a little verklempt. So I cannot tell you how grateful we are for you all to have the bravery, the consideration to share. The slides you just went past when you talked about humanity. In the backstage, we were talking about that. So I see a couple of questions that have come in, but I do want to pick up one right now that comes sort of thematically from the group, what I picked up. You said 2 4-letter words, you young ladies. You all said 2 4-letter words. One was hard, and the other was work. And as you talked of your personal stories, if maybe each of you can do a quick reflection on what was the hard part to become this tri-unit that you are now. You spoke about working together. And Aura, I want to start with you because your perspective was certainly, one that you had to live with. You talked about it in your entire career. Those are some great companies you showed. Mm-hmm. Please reflect on the word hard and the word work as it relates to the stories that you shared with us today.
For me, personally, the hardest part was losing myself. It was allowing all of the outside voices, all of the outside feedback, all of the outside influence to really, at one point, literally shut down my own inner voice, my own inner light, my own inner knowing, my own self. Those were probably some of the darkest days for me. And I don't think I'm alone. I think as Black, Indigenous people of color, we live in a separate world than white people. And we are very much othered. And so that was the hardest part for me, was losing myself. And then the work was investing and caring for and nurturing and healing that inner self, to stand in a place of truth, to stand in a place of empowerment, to stand in a place of love. My ability to extend an abundance of love to my white colleagues, to my white girlfriends, to my white community, literally stems from the core abundance of love that I have for myself.
Thank you, Aurora.
Mm-hmm.
Me, I'm sorry, did you say Kelly?
Yes, I did. Kelly.
So, ignorance is bliss. And I was a blissful, can I curse? No, probably not. Mofo for most of my life. And so for me, and I touched on this, but the hard part is coming to terms with grief, with grieving the loss of the identity I thought I had.
There you go.
Grieving the loss of the identity I thought our country had. And, you go through all the things. You go through the denial, you go through the anger, you go through the acceptance, bargaining. Yeah. All I don't have the right order right now, but all of those stages. And some of the moments, I would really get stuck and very self-hateful. Cause really, I mean, that was an easy go-to for me, an easy rabbit hole of easy hamster wheel, I should say, of not good enough, not, bad person, shitty friend, just go down this rabbit hole. And it's also, it's non-productive, and it really didn't do what needed to happen, which was heal me. Mm-hmm. I didn't even think I had any trauma. I mean, when I first met Aurora, I was like, trauma? I don't have trauma. I had like a charmed ass life. Like I had, the stars were aligned when I was born. Mm-hmm. And it's like white supremacy culture traumatizes everybody. Mm-hmm. And the ones that look like, we're at the top of the ladder checking all the boxes, well, like there's a lot of trauma there. There's a lot of self-hate there. There's a lot of denial and perfectionism and like I said, inequality that I had learned. And so coming to terms with that and then being able to kind of say it to my parents is like, whew, but it's so freeing.
It's
right?
hard for you, right?
It's so freeing. And, it made me grow up. It made me really grow up. And I realized how childlike I was in a lot of ways, or immature. I shouldn't say childlike, immature. And here I am, a grown woman with 3 children and a home and, responsibilities. And I was not taking responsibility for the parts of my identity that was giving me all the things in my life that I thought was normal. So, hard work, it's like we've all done hard work, right? But this was, and it still gets hard. And sometimes our friendship is harder than ever because it's so intimate, and we know how things get more hard when you're more responsible, right? Like
Yes.
the more you're responsible for things, the more honest you are, the harder it can feel. But I mean, really, there's also a softening there that I have to surrender into and trust. And that can be hard.
With being uncomfortable. Pamela, can you wrap this question up, and then I know Kate.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to echo some of the things that Kelly shared and even that Aurora shared about losing yourself. I think for me, the hardest part, and I'm really thinking back to like 3 years ago when I started to spend a lot more time with Aurora, reflecting on meetings that we had been in together and talking about dynamics that we both observed in the room. And Aurora would often, if not always, have a very different interpretation of what she had seen the white people in the room doing than I would. And I think for me, as we continue to have these conversations that were maybe close to arguments in the beginning, then became just like soft conflict and then became conversations, I think one of the hardest things for me was just my own resistance, because I think it was really difficult for me to think that I didn't know, what I didn't know. I spent my whole career in corporate America thinking certain things about my own intuitions and thinking things about what it was that had made me successful. Just as I equally believe things about myself as a person, like I shared when I was sharing my story that I felt made me more racially sensitive or whatever I thought they made me. And so I think the hard part was, the resistance of not wanting to believe that there was possibly not a lot of truth to all of that. And, I think then the work piece of it, I think is, just committing to once you see it, not turning back. I'm luckier than 98% of the people on this call because I get to spend almost all of my time with Aurora. And in addition to everything that Kelly shared about, she is one of the most loving, giving friends and teachers and guides that you could ever hope to have. And she has really modeled so much for me in terms of her own patience and forgiveness and just capacity to see a growth path for me before I was able to see it. And so I think that the work has maybe been a little less painful and easier with someone like her in my life. But that's not to say it is hard and it is work because you do have to, once you decide that you're okay with accepting all these things that Aurora's saying or that I'm reading or that I'm witnessing, then it's like, okay, well, I have to, once I've accepted that I'm a part of it and I'm a part of how these problems came to be, then the work is like, well, examining, okay, well, was the way that I said that not the right way to say it? Was the thing that I was thinking not the way I should be framing it mentally? Was the, and so that's the work for me, is like kind of challenging myself more to continue to question my assumptions and my knee-jerk reactions and all of those things myself, without Aurora having to be the one to always kind of point it out to me. So.
Awesome. Hard and work. That was the theme of that question, and you guys did brilliantly. Thank you. Kate.
So we're seeing a lot of people in the chat talk about their environment, talking about their family dynamics, talking about, I think Erin just put it in the chat again, about editing, so to speak, the people in their lives. How do we approach these type of topics? How can we move past or, not talk to certain people anymore that have been in our lives for years and years and years? So could you touch on that, ladies?
I'd love to. I kind of laugh, Erin, because I just literally started doing a podcast with Aurora and just was like, it was easier to do a podcast than actually talk to my friends and family a lot of the time. But what I've found is that to cut to the short answer is I don't cut anybody out of my life. I don't have to. I just stay true to who I am and what I value. And those people either peter out, or sometimes they peter out and sometimes they peter back in. I mean, this is a journey, and I feel like friendship is a journey as well. And I can't turn and look at friends and family and say, like, how could you be like that? Da, 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 when I was like that 5 minutes ago. And they are me. I am them. So, does that mean that I don't hold them accountable for what they may say or what they may do? I can question it. I can point it out. People know what I feel now because I broadcast it on the pod waves, so to speak. And there's some friends that they don't say anything. They don't do anything. But then you see these like cracks of light come through. And so I never want to give up hope, but I just continue down my path. So for what that's worth, sometimes people take other paths. But I just find that the more that I come from love, the less I find that I'm being fought with or having to be defensive or.
And the other thing I would love to add to what Kelly said, and it's not our responsibility to change people.
No, in fact, I'm not going to change them. I think in AA we say something like attraction, not sales, or something like that. It's like you just be you and attract what comes to you. And I'm not going to sell people on how awesome all of this is. Maybe I am. I don't know, but yeah, it's not our job to change them. We just said it. It's going to be their job individually, right? Yeah, there's always cracks of hope, Erin. You'll find them, and you're going to meet amazing people on the path.
Thanks, ladies. One of the things that Susan and I heard, and I know some of the folks on the phone heard at one of our last leadership retreats, were some of the women expressed what I would call maybe a trepidation about broaching these subjects with their husbands, with significant others, their partners. That's something that we heard sort of very loud and clear. And that they had, some folks had grown up so differently, right? And then ended up with someone who, at some points they've gotten into these very difficult, very deep conversations. And in some cases were surprised, and some cases, of course, they weren't. Is there a way that you would suggest approaching, right, your loved one, your family member, whatever? And I know, Kelly, you talked about a little bit about your uncle or conversations with your father. What does that sound like? How do we begin?
I did want to share one quick thing. So I don't want to take it from either of you if you jump in, but I did want to share one quick thing that bounces off a couple other questions too. And that's in the moment. What do you do? Like in the moment when you're uncomfortable in these conversations, what do you do? And the Lions Story, which is a phenomenal organization outside of Philadelphia, or in Philadelphia, actually at the University of Penn with Dr. Howard Stevenson, practice this. It's called CLCBE. CLCBE. Calculate what's happening, locate where is it in my body, communicate. My palms are sweating, my stomach doesn't feel good. I'm like tingling in the back of my neck, my whole back is like sweating. Breathe and exhale. So you come into presence, you don't have any history that you're coming from, you don't have any future that you're coming from. Same with my husband, same with my dad. coming into the present moment so that you can be one with that person. You love that person, right? And like being loving, God, it's so hard, right? Like it's so hard sometimes. But really calculate, locate, communicate, breathe, exhale, and come from that place of love, and really just sit, and it will come through you. And that might sound woo woo, and I don't care. But yeah, some husbands are like-minded. Sometimes people are like, "Are you and your husband still married?" Yes.
Yeah. And two things I would build, but I do believe that the Lion Story just has a wonderful program and exercise to uncharge those charged moments of race. I would offer two other things, which is coming from a place of non-judgment and non-shame.
Yeah.
Two critical things.
Yeah.
And if you can't do that in that moment, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
We would offer, then that's not the moment to have the conversation.
Yeah, it's not going anywhere.
Great. I just got another question, and I'm just going to read this one verbatim. I think it's very important. For conversations with hiring managers and peers, both in tech and in healthcare, what is the best way to bring to someone to their understanding so there's no shortage of Black talent?
So say that again.
Yeah, can you ask that again, Kate? Sorry,
Yeah.
I think I lost the thread towards the end.
Yeah.
No, sure. So in terms of helping with conversations with hiring managers or peers within the tech and healthcare industry, what's the best way to bring someone to an understanding that there's no shortage of Black talent, right? There is a shortage of Black talent. Like, how do you get someone there?
There is not a shortage of Black talent. I think that, and these are the stories that we tell ourselves. These are the things that race around organizations that are simply not true. You may not know them. You may not be looking in the places where this talent exists, but trust me, it's there. Why am I forgetting the name of the phenomenal, led by Morgan Brown, Afrotech? It's an incredible, thousands and thousands of Black, Indigenous people of color concentrate, used to, I think it's going to be a virtual event this year, all aspects of technology. But I guarantee you that 99% of the people attending that event are all Black, Indigenous people of color. And they're literally having the event. It used to happen in San Francisco. They moved it to Oakland. And I would offer that most of your recruiting teams, most of your hiring managers have no clue that that event happens every year. And like that, there are many.
I just want to offer something to add on to what Aurora said. 20 years ago, I think the pervasive knowledge in Silicon Valley and Silicon Alley, which existed in New York City at that point in time, was that there were no women to be in tech, right? Women didn't understand math and science enough. There was no way you could get women into STEM. It was just a male-dominated field because women just, we just couldn't cut it. And, somehow or another, all these organizations sprang up that started teaching women to code. And turns out that there were millions of women who were dying to get into tech. And so it always kind of amazes me when we decide that there's this one group that just can't possibly, have interest or know about or have the talent. Because, to Aurora's point, it's not true. And I think it's really about opening up, being willing to open your aperture to say that, believe that there are people of every color who want to be in the tech industry and want to be in the healthcare industry. And more importantly, believe that it is critical to your success to find them. Because I would argue that part of the reason why these people don't get brought into these organizations is because the people who are charged with sourcing and hiring and promoting and keeping people in organizations don't actually believe that making sure that they're intentionally intentionally hiring BIPOC into their organizations is critical to their commercial success. And so when we reorient our brains to realize that we can't possibly be as successful as we will without finding Black talent, then we will magically find Black talent.
Yeah, and we will not only find it, but I think also most importantly, we will create environments that are worthy of them participating in. You know, I spent 25 years in corporate America. I reported in that tenure, I had almost over 40 bosses. Two facts. One, in those years, I only reported to a person of color once in my entire career. Number two, every single time that I left a position, despite my clarity to always have a succession bench that was at least 2 or 3 people deep, I was never replaced with a person of color. And so consequently, we also have to take accountability as white-led organizations to dismantle the homogeneous environments that we are extremely comfortable in. That, as Pamela said, data after data has now proven to us do not fail in performing at the same level as diverse organizations or organizations that are led by diverse leaders and teams.
There's a question, you know, of course you hit home with me on that one. You and I can talk forever on that one as well. I've got a couple of stories about this industry in particular and its hesitancy to see, find, and know that Black exists below us, around us, and everywhere. So that was an excellent array of answers, guys. Thank you. There's a number of the questions. We're down to about 7 minutes left, and I know that Kate wants to have one last word for you all. But I do want to pose just another question, and Aaron, I do see it. It's talking about what lens should we view scientific method with? I'm not sure what you mean by scientific method, but I think your second piece is around wanting to remove blinders. So there's a theme here. There was another question earlier that went into understanding my whiteness. So you guys put the slide up, you had the structure and all of those definitions, but how do you really get in tune with it and know when you've moved the needle? What was that aha moment maybe you had when you moved the needle in understanding and really deeply accepting your whiteness and this privilege and the supremacy of it all?
It's ongoing. And to address your question, Aaron, when I look at like the emphasis on scientific method as being part of white culture, I think what it's saying here is that it's held above everything else as the most important way of figuring out a scientific problem. And a lot of you are scientists on here potentially. A lot of science is unknown, to my knowledge. I am not a scientist, but there's probably other ways besides linear rational thinking that maybe could work in so many different ways, and that we value that linear thinking, which I don't know, I even think like as I identify as a woman, I don't always think linearly at all. And I don't think that's valued as much in our culture. So I don't think it's saying that we shouldn't value scientific method. I think it's saying that we value it over anything else and nothing else is acceptable.
Yeah, and I'm going to add to that. And so, as someone who comes from an indigenous background, my mother is Mexican, my father is African American. I grew up with a homeopathic mother before it was trendy and it was the cool thing to be. I don't ever recall being given an aspirin or anything that was man-made as a medicinal remedy for anything that may have been ailing me, whether it was a cough, whether it was a scraped knee, whether it was a headache. And so I think it's again, moving out of that binary thinking. And I'm not saying that scientific and medicine is not saves lives and is not appropriate, but I think there's also a science to me, culturally, it is a science, right? There are customs, traditions, intuition, an aspect that, some people may call woo and spiritual. I never realized that people actually took medicine for a headache because I was always given a remedy that came out of my mother's garden.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's understanding that some of these traditions and some of this medicine, we look at Chinese medicine that's been here for thousands upon years. And I think it's about how do we marry that and make space and room for the possibility of those solutions.
And the valuing
along,
of it, right?
and the
That's
valuing.
that
Thank you,
Yeah.
Susan. The valuing.
spoke to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So-
I do want to just touch back, Susan, because you
Sure,
had
please.
another part of the question, but only if we have time.
I think you can slip it in if you can give us a minute, and then we'll go back to Kate to close us out.
And just touch on it for me. You said
The second part was around,
in
I don't
realizing
want to
my
walk
whiteness.
around. Yeah, the whiteness. So now you've laid out what whiteness feels like, but how do you know when you just know that you turn the corner in this area of being privileged and supreme with it?
Oof. I have to be vigilant all the time, to be honest. I mean, in AA, it's like, it's easy. I know when I'm not putting a drink in my mouth, but I don't always know when I'm not, imbuing white supremacist culture. It's way more slippery than that. And it's really easy to fall back asleep, and I can be in my comfortable home, in my comfortable, pretty much white suburb, and look out the window at the birds and not think anything's wrong. So there's constantly a vigilance that I have to have about myself, and the places that I put myself in now bring me to more awakening and less numbing out.
So
But it's a constant vigilance.
Right. So that internal motivation, we go right back to the beginning of your circle of the 5 elements.
Yeah.
The first thing you spoke of was motivation. This has got to be something you do. I know there was several people in the chat as a comment said that that's something you have to really decide you are going to be different.
And I also want to say that I don't identify with my whiteness. It is not, I know I am a whole person. I am a loving being. I am a human. And whiteness is something that has, been this lens through which I've looked and through which I've been treated in the earth suit and the body that I'm in this time around. But really, I don't want to lean on identifying to it either.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think you met the challenge. Thank you. Challenging question, honestly. With that, Kate, I'm going to turn over to you to close us out.
Okay, great. I do see one last question here. I don't know if we can just answer this last one from
Be
Nate.
quick.
Yeah, we'll be quick.
Oh, I have a quick one for this. Yeah. Is this Nancy's question?
Yes, thank you. And then we'll close out. Thanks.
Okay, so lion story, which we mentioned before, they're called comeback lines. Practice them in your mirror. Literally say them out loud to yourself in the car, because the more they become common and the more you'll have them at the ready. And so when people say like openly racist stuff, I'm just like, nope, not here, or we don't do that, or we don't say that. Or like, what did you mean by that? Just nope, no, thank you. Like I just shut it down as fast as possible. It's like, nope. But they call them comeback lines. So I think they work. Practice.
It's not so easy, right? Not so easy. So,
Yeah. But
Kelly,
it gets easier.
It does.
It gets so much easier.
It does.
So Kelly, Pamela, and Aurora, if you could leave us with one final thought, and then quickly, because we are close to time, what would that be? And Kelly, we're going to start with you.
Know your story. Really, really know your story. Unapologetically, fully accountably, and lovingly know your story.
Aurora?
I would offer opting into waking up from the indifference so that you can wake up to your humanity.
Wonderful. Pamela?
And I guess what I would say is open your heart for it to break, because then it will only grow back bigger.
Well said.
So look, I got to take the host's license here. Wow. Well said. Thank you. Open your heart so for it to be broken so it could become bigger again. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Aurora, Kelly, and Pamela, for your honesty, for your insight, for your unbelievable candor. Thank you so much to my co-host, Susan, and to all of you for opting in with us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Love you all.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you, everyone.
And Susan and everyone on the call.
Thank you for being
Thank
here.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.